what is it that you have? What is it that you are good at? And contribute that to the movement. When we start to create an inviting narrative, I think it'll encourage more people to forget about the competition, because we don't need more Melatis. We need more of everybody doing their strengths and contributing it back to this large movement that we're all a part of.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and their experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. When it came to naming the podcast Oh My Curry Goodness, I broke it down into two parts. When we hear stories that are interesting, we say oh my goodness. And I added curry because as someone who is South Asian, curry is a very popular term. And so when it came to the idea of something, or when it came to having a catchy tone, I thought, oh my curry goodness was a pretty cool way of saying it. But nevertheless, what I hope that you guys as listeners take away from each episode are two things. One, taking valuable lessons from each guest as you continue to write your own story. And secondly, just knowing what it's like to be a human being, or what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. Because while we can acknowledge all the incredible work people are doing, they are also human beings at the end of the day. Sure, they are legends, but legends can also be human beings. So I hope you guys continue to check back each and every week to listen to incredible stories who are of the Gen Z generation. Now, this week, I am talking to Melati Wijsen, who is the founder of YOUTHTOPIA, which is an organization focusing on youth empowerment through meaningful peer-to-peer programs and providing them the tools they need to be change makers. Her vision is simple: to make YOUTHTOPIA the go-to platform for young change makers. Why I'm really excited about interviewing Melati is, one, her mission to empower young people, but secondly, as someone who's been doing some research on Indonesia, I really have to ask some burning questions. So, Melati, thank you so much for joining the Oh My Curry Goodness podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And wow, what an introduction as well. I love the concept. I love everything about it. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I do appreciate it. And I love when every guest says that about my introduction, just because as someone who loves to overthink on podcasts, that's my go-to thing. I love overthinking and then getting that compliment. So I appreciate it. But
No worries at all. Overthinking is also where some of the good stuff happens, right? And then when we just do it, that's where a lot of reward comes in.
That is true. Now, before we talk about your journey, I really have to ask you. So before we got on this interview, me and my friend were just looking up Indonesian facts, and we happened to see that curry is a popular dish in Indonesia. So, Melati, on behalf of everyone everyone who helps with this podcast, and I'm sure all curry lovers listening to this podcast, do you love curry? And secondly, where do you rank curry? If you do, where do you rank it in terms of your favorite food?
Oh my goodness, oh my curry goodness, because curry is actually it's my favorite dish, and it's made by my dad. The way that he makes a curry, it's my favorite family tradition to have a dinner with my whole family around the table and my dad's big pot of curry. So curry is like number one for me.
Oh my goodness. Oh my curry goodness. I think Melati, it's been like 5 minutes. I feel like you are officially our favorite guest of the podcast, just because you said, oh my curry goodness. We're gonna need a part 2 in-person event. It will probably be the scariest interview of my life, because anyone who's had curry knows that as great of a dish as it is, it can give you stomach problems too. And so I don't want to be in a situation where we're like, Melati, it was so great meeting you, and then you have to do an event, and then it's like, my stomach is killing me, and then everyone's gonna blame me because you're on a podcast called Oh My Curry Goodness. So
don't worry, I've got an Indonesian stomach. I can handle it.
Well, here's the thing. My parents are from Bangladesh, so I kind of acquired the South Asian stomach. Although when I do go to Bangladesh, my stomach can sometimes be inconsistent. But
yeah, totally different ball.
If we ever have a part 2, we'll discuss more of that. But firstly, one of the reasons why I was interested is not just because of the curry, but also because you have this mission of empowering young people all around the world. But I want to break it down, or kind of want to narrow it down into where you come from, because you are obviously Indonesian. And I'm curious to know, because I don't know what Indonesian culture is like. I've said this on many episodes of my podcast, where South Asians have like they're fantastic for. So science, technology, engineering, math. And so anything outside of that is like a scary situation. So as someone who's Indonesian, tell me a bit about the pressure you put on yourself in terms of trying to be the best person or best representation for young people in Indonesia, or particularly young women in Indonesia. I
Mm.
ask this a lot with some of my guests who are of Middle East descent, and they'll admit that they, even though they're one of many Middle Eastern descent, that there's still a pressure that they have. And obviously, you're not the only Indonesian on earth, but what is that? Tell me a bit about that pressure you put on yourself when it comes to representing Indonesian or young Indian people in Indonesia.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. Also, the framing of the question, recognizing that I'm not the only one, recognizing that there are so many incredible young Indonesians. This country has so much potential, especially when young women, are at the front lines of change. We see a lot of incredible, like for me, when I think about role models in leadership positions or in key influencing positions here in Indonesia. I can name quite a few, off the top of my head. For example, in the reporting industry, Nashwa Shihab, as a young change maker, I always admired her ability to speak truth to power. Another one, our Minister of Finance, Sri Mulyani, and her leadership role on international stages and in the political realm. So, growing up, we start seeing those changes and women taking those roles of leadership. But as a young change maker, I think there's a lot of pressure to be able to keep on going in this space, because growing up, you're constantly challenged as to why you're in those rooms, as to why you won't just continue school and just be pretty. So there's a lot of expectations being a girl, but then there's an added expectation as well in terms of age. And this is culturally something that we experience here as young change makers, that we do not speak out and above to our elders, that we do not challenge the systems that are already in place. And so this was something that, growing up here in Indonesia, we had to go and overcome culturally these barriers that were set in place by generations before us. But we're not alone. We are a growing generation of unstoppable young people. And here on this wall behind me, the change makers that we work with at YOUTHTOPIA, we have such a diversity in things that we're passionate about as well, because of how big the country is. So I'm very optimistic, very passionate. And I think that sometimes overpowers the pressure that I feel on the bad days, where I think it's too much and it feels heavy on my shoulders. Because I've also learned after 10 years of doing this work that it's okay to step back, sit back, recharge when you need to, and come back when you're ready, stronger than ever.
I love how you ended that, and it's true that I mean, obviously this is a video podcast, but for those who are watching it audio, obviously you have a plethora of people behind you. Well, I mean, like pictures, not actual people, but
Just sign it behind me.
yeah.
But yeah, it's one of my favorite features actually of my office where I'm sitting in right now, this wall with all these incredible faces of change makers globally and nationally here in Indonesia. It's a strong visual, I feel, because it represents the diversity of our generation.
Yeah, and before we talk about being a change maker, one of the things, because me and my friend did, we were getting ready for this interview, and the most common thing when it comes to you personally is this unselfishness, which is as easy as it sounds. It's not something that we can literally acquire, because for some reason we have this selfishness to become the best. And you're someone that, yes, you've created Utopia, a place to empower young people, but like you said, you're like, don't look at me, focus on all the people that are throughout this journey. Where does unselfishness come from? Because that's not something that a lot of people are able to acquire. And you have this, like, obviously, I know that you're still learning even now, but having that bit of unselfishness where it's like, it's not about you, it's about other people. That's not something a lot of people can acquire. So tell me a bit about this, where you, where this unselfishness journey started.
Growing up on Bali, we have this beautiful way of life, and it's called Trihita Karana. And I think this is really the foundation of where I started to understand this bigger than us concept. Trihita Karana is a way of life where we live in harmony with the natural world around us, the people around us, and then the self-awareness that lives within us ourselves. And I think this balance, this formula so to speak, in more modern terms, this formula of life, for me allowed to create the space and understanding that there's so much more than anything self-gain or ego-driven would get me towards. And I think the love for nature, especially, being in awe, being in admiration and just deep wonder, that's where I started my activism journey from. That's where I started at the age of 12 years old, asking no other question than how can I be a part of the solution, right? It wasn't an intention that grew from money-driven expectations or a political angle or a self-greed and ego-driven journey. And I think that pure intention built a foundation that was very strong for me to understand who I am and what I am passionate about. And I think, yes, definitely, it is not a common space or a common journey for people to reach, especially at such a young age, but that's partially because of the culture globally that we have built for ourselves, where we value success of oneself versus the success of us all. And it's a really difficult narrative to change because our education system, think about it, our grading system, the way that we reach different, success points or victory points in school already teach us that we have to focus on getting good grades for ourselves versus teamwork. Then in our jobs, there's this expectation ladder that you have to climb to reach a level of success for one person title, instead of, again, teamwork and building a successful company together. The expectation is all on the leader. So it's a large societal, almost, I want to say the word cage, but I feel like that's a bit intense. But there's limitations that we have created for ourselves that don't allow us to see that bigger picture, that don't allow us to question the bigger than us concept. I could go on. So, but yeah, essentially, I think I owe it a lot to growing up in Bali and my love for nature.
Okay, first of all, I was laughing when you were talking about this idea of not focusing on grades, but focusing on teamwork. Because what we need to do is we need to send you to like South Asian countries and then tell people that it's not about getting A's, it's more than that. But I feel like, and that's why I don't know much about Indonesian culture other than the curry fact, but which is that it feels like we live in a world where we are more focused on getting the best grades because we think grades mean success. But then I've had people, and I'm sure you meet people all the time, where it's like they may come from places where they didn't have the best or the strongest academic record, but they're still doing incredible things regardless. And it's an unfortunate narrative that we put in because it's like, I don't know where it comes from, and I don't think it's anyone's fault, but it's like because A means awesome or excellence, but it's like, no, excellence can be coming from anyone regardless of who they are or where they come from. I know you were going to say something, so that's just kind of like where I'm thinking.
Yeah, and think about the way we build our curiosity. I think the best way that I can explain is through my experience speaking in schools and classrooms all around the world. My favorite age group is that 12 to 16 years old because they're still so curious. And the younger ones especially, I mean, if I'm in a classroom of grade, threes and fours and fives and sixes, they're all at the edge of their seats before I'm even finished and saying, oh, what's your favorite color? How and why are we not creating change faster? How does it take so long? And they're asking thousands of questions at 100 miles an hour. And then you go into that 12 to 16 age group, and they're a little bit more cautious, but they're still curious. You still see that growing flame of curiosity within them. And by the time you reach high school, students, it takes maybe 2 minutes and a lot of awkwardness for me on stage of like trying to sell jokes that don't really hit, before there's one person who's brave enough to ask that question. So what do we see here, and why do I always bring this story up of the difference in age and the asking of questions? It's because we have an education system, we have a society that somehow doesn't celebrate curiosity. It doesn't encourage us to ask questions because, oh my goodness, imagine the fear of you being wrong or asking the wrong question. When in fact, I was always raised with the belief that there is no such thing as a wrong question. But we don't have that safe space at scale. So that's where I think the curiosity starts to slow down. And we have this massive expectation that replaces our curiosity of what we're supposed to do. And that is where I think, yeah, we get very stuck and where we have a lot of our problems.
Before we go into change making, first of all, every time you kept saying curiosity, I was just hoping you said curiosity because the podcast called Oh My Curry Goodness. I was like, fingers crossed, please tell me she
That
said
is a
that.
good one. That is a good one.
I actually, what's funny, on my social media, sometimes I say stay curious, and it doesn't really make sense because it's like you think of the word curious or curious, but I don't know. I'm trying to work on it. Um,
Yeah.
um, you've mentioned how you describe yourself as a change maker, and you've done this since the age of 12. This is a very, I think anytime when you go into the activism change making journey, it's a very difficult journey because there's the pressure, there's you want to inspire people, and then this idea or this motivation, this self motivation to keep going when times are difficult. I want to ask you this because this is a question I ask all my guests because I feel like, and I'm sure everyone will agree that there are experiences from the past that can help us navigate in the future. When you look back in your life, what were some of the what were some things that you used to be scared of that you're no longer scared of anymore? And how often do you use that experience or those experiences when tackling difficult challenges? And I'll give you an example. I'm afraid of spiders. I will never overcome that fear. I don't think I will. I'm trying. But my fear of talking to people was a big thing. And yet here I am with this podcast. Sure, I'm still struggling at times, but the idea of meeting people, at least virtually, even though they're strangers, and now here we are connecting and we can say we're friends. Like because of the podcast, it's helped me to navigate that fear of talking to people. So, what was something that you used to be scared of that you're no longer scared of anymore? And how often do you use that experience when you're tackling difficult challenges?
Believe it or not, I had a similar fear of speaking in public, of speaking out. I was that 12-year-old girl in the back of the classroom, head down when it was time to give a presentation in class. And I thought to myself, please, teacher, don't pick me, don't pick me, don't pick me. So I had that immense fear of speaking in public. You know, I'd have the sweaty palms, the shaky knees, the butterflies in the tummy, and I still get that. But I think what I found when I was 12 years old and when I saw the problem of plastic pollution increasing on the island of Bali, it was again that moment of stepping into something where I knew that it wasn't about me. And I found that experience, I found that realization being the foundation of my confidence to actually get up there and talk about something that had nothing to do with me. And there is something to say about that because I feel like there's so much pressure on young people, especially today, when they think about becoming a change maker. It's not about you. And that's the most powerful tool. So find something that you can connect with, find something that you're passionate about, that you could talk about, and just do it. You learn by doing. And for me, when I stood on that first stage with my sister when we were 10 and 12 years old, we had A4 size pieces of paper in front of us with handwritten notes. And, you know, we crossed out a bunch of sentences, rewrote it 100 times the night before, and we read over the script. And afterwards, after that very first session, the kids that were in the audience ran up to us and said, how do we sign up? How can we be part of your team? And it really took off right after that. It was word of mouth, the power of speaking out. And I started to recognize that that was one of the tools that I would later, over the last 10 years, grow into, where today I can speak in front of a crowd of 10, 30, or 9,000 people.
You mentioned the idea of doing something that's bigger than you, and that's so true when it comes to being a change maker. Because can you imagine if Melati in an alternate universe said it's me versus someone else instead of me and this person tackling another bigger or tackling a bigger issue? Like those are two different things, and I don't think people will be able to give you those compliments that you I'm sure you get all the time when it comes to empowering young people. Because now, if you're doing me versus someone else who's involved in this, then it's like, wait, what is Malati's vision? Is it to actually empower young people, or is she selfishly empowering herself in a way. And actually, that's something I'm curious about, because I feel like in sometimes people do put in that like competition phase. Like if you're an activist, people will go like, okay, how many people have you inspired? How many people have you inspired? Malachi's inspired X amount of people. You haven't inspired any. And it feels like we have to live in a competitive thing instead of focusing on that collective goal, which is it's about something bigger than us. So obviously, as someone, I know there might be some bias in the fact that you've done so many events, TED Talks, and everything. But what advice would you give to someone that feels like they have to compete with you? Because we don't want to compete with you. We want to join you in taking part of something much bigger than, like you said, than us.
Well, I think this is where we have to see a narrative change, right? So often we focus on a climate crisis. What actually I think where we have to first tackle is a communication crisis. We have created a like cancel culture, for example, is so dangerous. It builds such a disconnect. And when we're disconnected with each other, of course, we cannot celebrate, we're competing. And I think the time for competition versus collaboration is really where we need to start focusing on. So, one, the narrative change that we need to have is that everybody is a change maker, whether you are a writer, a podcast host, whether you are an artist, a researcher, a scientist, an innovator, whether you're a great storyteller, a National Geographic photographer. We are all change makers. And I think this sets if we're going to use the traditional terms of competition, it sets the field a lot wider, right? Because suddenly there isn't one expectation of what it looks like to be part of this movement. And that's why I love this wall behind me again, these visual representative of all the different faces. But more importantly, the reason why I love it is I said the diversity of it, and it's the diversity of the way we create change. There are so many skill sets behind me that they excel in where I don't have at all. The skill of art, for example. I'm a wreck when it comes to holding a paintbrush. Someone else has the skill of running into politics and is the youngest mayor in their entire city's history. Incredible skill sets that I may not have, that you may not have, but what is it that you have? What is it that you are good at? And contribute that to the movement. When we start to create an inviting narrative, I think it'll encourage more people to forget about the competition, because we don't need more Malatis. We need more of everybody doing their strengths and contributing it back to this large movement that we're all a part of.
I want to transition to the idea of gratefulness, because I think one of the reasons why I started this podcast is whenever I see, let's use you for example. We see the stuff on social media. You're promoting, you're raising awareness for an important cause. You're smiling. You are embracing working together, working with other change makers. But there's also a part of me that's like, what is it actually like to be Melati? Like, I actually want to know her difficult days. And obviously, I don't want to be like, tell me the worst day of your life. But I am curious to know, even though you have had a lot of success, whether it's with Utopia or empowering young people, there are also days where you're like, this was one of the worst days of my life, but I'm grateful because I've become a much stronger person. And so I ask this with all my guests. I want to make sure that when you do answer, that you give me an answer that you're comfortable with, because I don't want to like make you feel any uncomfortness. But what are some things that you look back and you go, I hated these days, or that these were some of the worst days of my life, but I'm grateful because if it wasn't for these days or experiences, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I love that you opened it with gratefulness, because I think it's one of the biggest tools that we can use to pull ourselves out of those difficult days. So, personally, what I have practiced for as long as I can remember is coming up with at least 3 things that I'm grateful for in that 24 hours of a day. And I think that the it's not a challenge. I mean, the task, the goal of just doing that simple 3 things, finding 3 things, no matter how difficult or how beautiful the day was, 3 things that you're grateful for every single day, and putting active attention to things that you're grateful for allows yourself to, I think, move forward in love and not in fear. And I always use that as my source of where I started. It goes back to the pure intention conversation that we had before. But some of the difficult days, the challenges, let's see, I'm 23 now, and I've had 3 major burnouts already. And that goes because I started to, I think, operate from a place of where everyone else expected me to, with that heavy expectations of, Melati is doing this. What's next, Mel? Oh, you opened for Obama, and now what? And I'd just stand there and I'd be like, I have no idea, or, oh, Melati, so now that bioplastic bags achieved its goal of Bali being plastic bag free, what are you going to do next? The plastic bottles? And it was a lot of pressure at a very young age that I had experienced. And I started to feed into the narrative. And as you said, I'm still learning, but I dipped into that pressure where I started to focus on myself and thinking that it wasn't good enough what I was doing and I had to do more and it was up to me to be busy all the time. And then you create a hamster wheel that, similar to every other traditional industry, I started to create one in my change-making world, which obviously doesn't fit because everything we had just talked about, of it being a community-led movement, of it being not about you, of it being a grassroots movement where if you need to step back, people will be there to continue the work without you because it's not about you. And so I started to get into that toxic loop where I fell into that, which is very easy to do with the world that we've created. And I had 3 really major burnouts where I went into silent retreats and I went into Ayurvedic camps and I went into a lot of medical diagnosis where for a full year I had a whole health journey to go over to overcome. It sucked. It really sucked. And I often say that I wish I had something to say inspirational here, that, there's a quick fix that will solve it all. But that was the hard lesson that I had to learn. There is no quick fix, especially not for moments of burnout, which feels like you've lost sight of your purpose. That's how I define my burnouts. And I think moving forward, that gratitude exercise helped me. Spending time in nature helped me. And I think I'm really grateful for those experiences of burnouts because it put me in such a deep, bottom pit where you think it can't get worse than this. And then it did get worse than this, and it did get worse, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. But it taught me how resilient and how strong I actually am, and that I have the community around me to get out of a situation like that. I have the support of my parents to get out of a situation like that. And I have somewhere deep inside, even though sometimes I lose sight of it, the self-belief and the confidence to pull myself back into a place where I can actually keep going. And if I didn't have those, I think I would be operating still on a very high level moment where I would just be saying, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. But because of those experiences, because of those hardships with my health, with my mental health, I feel like I know a little bit where to look out for moving forward when I'm about to go back into that space, and now I can prevent it. Hopefully.
Yeah, before I do have a couple of questions before we wrap up, but one thing I do want to say is, so obviously this is the Oh My Kurganist podcast, but I actually had 3 podcasts before this, and then I quit all 3 because I just wasn't getting it right. And I think why failing was such a great tool, because I failed 3 podcasts, was just because recognizing that some of the best people, or not the best, influential people once failed. And I think what's really cool is listening to people's stories of failing, not in like a bragging sense, but in a hopeful sense. So for example, let's say you and I took a calculus exam. Calculus is annoyingly hard at times. But let's say Melati failed her calculus exam, but did incredible things. I can then look at your story, even though it's a really stupid story. I can look at it and go, so, okay, she failed. It's not a good experience, but I have hope in knowing that she was once in my shoes, and now I'm able to do that incredible thing. Or I know I have that belief that I can do incredible things because she once experienced that. And so that's why I think storytelling and eerily, in a way, representation, although I don't know how representation and failure can be, or anyone can fail, but just seeing that representative story just gives you that sense of belief and hope, and knowing that, okay, it's a terrible experience, but I can look at other people and know that they went through something similar and yet they're doing incredible things. So I think
Yeah.
what you said is really true. Before I let you go, I want to ask, when it comes to the idea of activism, there are things that you like and you don't like, but at the end of the day, you are at peace and knowing that there are good and bad. And I remembered I had a climate change activist open up about how he received death threats because he's a climate change activist. Now he's not at peace with getting death threats. Like that's not the point. But the point is that on a broader scale, there are people that agree with climate change and that it's happening, and there are those that don't believe that it's happening. But sometimes activists, like climate change activists, are at peace at knowing that these conversations will vary from person to person. I want to ask you, what is something that you are at peace with, knowing that there are some things that people might agree with? Like, the broader or the easy answer is there are people that will agree with my vision, then there are people that won't agree with my vision. Obviously, that's the easy answer, but what are some other things where you're like, I hate or I don't like how this is a thing? As someone who's in this field, I don't like how this is a thing, but I
Mhm.
understand that it's a part of this. Do you get what I mean? Like, what are some things where you're like, I understand that even though I don't like these things, that it's a part of this, that it's a part of this thing, if that makes sense.
Huh. Oh gosh. I could go so many different directions with this question. Um, Mainly because I think there's a lot of that exists in our world as young change makers. If we think about youth washing, for example, it happens. It's there. It's a big part of our everyday movements in every room that we go. Youth washing is similar to greenwashing, a very surface level interaction, and the way that young people interact with institutions, corporations. It is this limited belief that young people are there just for inspiration only. So youth washing happens. It's so frustrating, and I, I deeply dislike it, but I know that it almost needs to happen at times because that's the only way that the traditional organizations, institutions, corporations know how to deal with young people. So I think it's this balancing act of being at peace that it exists, but also challenging it that it doesn't stay like that forever. Using the comfort zone of these corporations and institutions on how they interact with the youth washing, but proving to them that we are so much more than inspiration only. So it's a balancing act. And I think that that's where the peace comes from, knowing that it won't always be like this, or the belief that it will still change. And I think that's probably one example that I can share with you to answer the question.
Yeah, for sure. And I was really worried that you didn't understand that question. I was like, I had it right, and then I botched it up. So I was like, okay, thank goodness that made sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always good at, adding a little spice to my answers and twisting it in a way where I would like to go with the story. But I think, in the sense of where it comes from with peace within of an experience or a moment or something that happens in our world, it would be, yeah, youth washing is one of them. And it's been a strange journey with youth washing as well, having started at 12, now being 23. I mean, that's 10 years in this space. And I've seen the evolution of how young people interact in these spaces. And youth washing is a big no, but it's something that does happen. And I think there's a lot of potential and opportunity that still lays out there to change.
My last question before we finish the episode. So for my first guest of season two, I asked someone, how do you, he's a guy. I asked him, how do you balance being kind and being strong? He's an entrepreneur and he has a very strong mindset, but he also focuses on mental health and being an empath or being a person who emphasizes empathy. So I spoke to him as from a guy's perspective, how to balance being kind and being strong. I want to ask you from a woman's perspective. Obviously, like I said, you're one of many. I'm not saying you're the only one. Tell me a bit about how you balance being kind and being strong. Now, for those
Mm.
wondering, Melati is not an MMA fighter. I'm not talking about like you're gonna roundhouse kick people, but I mean being mentally strong as a change maker, while also you like a lot of people would say you are a very kind person. So how do you balance being kind and being strong from a woman's perspective?
Yeah, I think this For me, the way that I answer it is maybe a story about being relatable. And I think that this is something where maybe young leaders understand more than traditional leaders, because there's a very clear line and a clear boundary, which I think is important to have. But I think you also have to remember to be relatable, and the narrative that we are all human and that we all feel anxiety and we all feel happiness and we all feel sadness at times. And I think it's about creating a leadership style where you are able to relate to your teammates, relate to the students that you're talking to, and not create a like a pedestal for yourself. This is where I'm also so worried sometimes that this story of all these incredible change makers at the front lines, it feels so far away. So the kindness doesn't also translate through, if it makes sense. I'm trying to get something out, but I don't know if it's coming out in the right way. But what I mean by relatability is that if people that you're working with or people that you're speaking to don't feel like they can connect with you, I feel like the kindness also doesn't translate through. So I always try and understand who I'm talking to or who I'm working with, and understand where they're coming from, where they are in their lives at the moment, and try to show that actually we are one and the same.
I know you're probably going to disagree with the statement, but I will say that you are a legend. But legends can also be human. And I know that you're probably going to say, well, Hamza, I know I'm doing incredible things, but the people behind me, if for those who are watching video, they're also legends as well. But I just want to say, Melati, I know you have an amazing mission to inspire so many young people around the world to be change makers. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. I know you are a very busy person, so it was so cool to make this happen. But thank you so much for being able to give people that hope and belief that they can inspire change regardless of who they are. And I hope we get to meet in person. Hopefully we can have a curry event. I will make sure that no one gets sick. But nevertheless, it was so great to connect with you, and best of luck with everything that you do.
Well, Hamza, thank you so much. I am today very grateful that you had the courage to start the podcast and invite me over. So gratitude to you. Thank you so much for a great conversation today. And I hope for those of you listening, you know that you are part of this movement of creating change as well.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.